Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic Hypersonic.
I'm Barry Peacock, and I'm here to talk to you about the latest episode of Star Trek Discovery. It was called Face the Strange, which may or may not be a reference to part of a line from David Bowie's Changes song. I'm not sure. Anyway, as it begins, we get a little bit of a flashback to 15 hours ago, where our marauders, Locke and Maul, poison a dirty dealer to get an item of some kind before promising each other they'll find the tech and get free and start making out. In the present aboard Discovery, we see that Gray and Adira are still friends and they're keeping up communication over the distance. Also, the tracker that was placed on Adira last episode is autonomous and mobile in the shape of a spider, and it seems to be spying around their quarters and then the bridge. Speaking of the bridge, we see that Raynor's command style rubs Burnham the wrong way when he bristles at the less rigid atmosphere on Discovery and the crew's over familiarity with each other and Michael. So she takes him to task in her ready room as the tracker infiltrates the ship's systems and seems to toss the ship back in time to when Discovery first time jumped. A moment later, Discovery seems to time jump again to when Discovery was in dry dock, just for a moment before jumping back to the battle with Control. So the ship is being bounced back and forth through time. At this point, Raynor realizes that it's a time bug, which he explains to Michael, who says they have to get to Stamets, who lives outside of time because of his tardigrade DNA. But Culber is putting him in a coma right at the moment to help him heal from an injury that he sustained during the battle with Control. So a time bug is apparently a mechanical bug that can get into a ship's system and cause it to go back and forth through time and space. Discovery then jumps to the battle with Osira from a couple of seasons ago, and apparently the turbolift can be directed to take certain routes on board Discovery based on dialogue in the episode where Michael says, go here, but take this route, which I didn't know turbolifts could do. But anyway, we see Raynor meet with Reno in this past time period before the ship jumps again, and we find the Discovery seemingly abandoned and in a state of disrepair before Raynor and Michael find the computer playing Que Sera, Sera, and they talk with Zora, who says it's the year 3218 and the crew is dead. And it shows them that Federation HQ is gone because the bad guys got the progenitor tech. So I think this is the future period that we saw in the short trek a couple of years ago, in which we learned that the crew has abandoned Discovery and it's been alone in space for a very long time, which was a cool callback. Raynor then mentions how it must be the case that the people who eventually wound up with the tech, who are the Breen, who must have got it off of Locke and Maul, must have been the highest bidders, which goes to a point that the nitpicking nerd made last week about the idea that, if these guys are just in it for the money, why hasn't, anyone contacted them and just said, hey, we'll pay you whatever you want or whatever you think is a fair price to just step out of the way and let us get to the thing, or help us. We'll pay you and just stop trying to get it for yourselves. Why hasn't anyone done that? It's kind of stupid, right? It's not like they don't know how to contact them because Book already did it. So I don't know. It's just weird. Like, why they just want money. So why not just pay them? Which is what apparently the Breen ended up doing in the future to get it from them. Anyway, with Zora's help, Michael figures out how the time jumping is working. And then they jump back again, still intent on finding Stamets, which seems odd to me because they just should have asked Zora where the bug was. Because she says to them, by the time the bug was found, it was too late. The Breen already had acquired the thing because Discovery was still locked up in the time loop. And the other guys got it and sold to the Breen. Either way, she knew where the bug was eventually found, which at that point they didn't know. So why didn't they just ask her that? And for that matter, why didn't they just ask her where the tech was eventually found? Because she probably knew that too. But they don't ask her. Kind of silly. Anyway, in the next scene, they find out that Stamets knows where it is, but tells them that it can't be removed too hastily or it would cause massive problems. So he has to build a doohickey to stabilize the time jumping. And so the three of them go around gathering parts aboard Discovery once the ship time jumps again. In the process, Michael inadvertently meets up with Book in the past when they were still together and is obviously uncomfortable when they smooch. But the device they make ends up destroying the time bug instead of just disabling it, which Stamets says is bad before they time jump again to the time frame of season 1. And it turns out that in order to solve the problem, they have to take the ship to maximum warp and then burst the warp bubble to let relativity take effect. On her way to the bridge, Michael runs into Linus in the turbo lift because apparently it stopped to pick him up when he called for it on his floor, but because she didn't tell it to take a direct route with no stops, which one imagines you could do. And then she runs into her younger self. Of course, past Michael recognizes that future Michael is wearing captain's pips, which is stupid because the uniform is completely different, and doesn't believe that it's herself from the future, thinking it's a shapeshifter or something, and they fight. Captain Burnham uses the Vulcan neck pinch after a while to incapacitate her younger self. And then Michael has to spill the beans to the bridge crew and convince them who she is and what they need to do. And she even tells that one robotic character whose name I forget about her death. But younger Michael regains consciousness and interrupts the plan in engineering alongside Lieutenant Reese. Raynor tells Captain Michael he thinks she needs to come down and talk to her old self, but she says she'd never make it in time because there's going to be another time jump, which is stupid because, of course, while it's great for the story because it leaves Raynor in a position of having to figure a way to de-escalate the situation, and it's great for his character development, it doesn't make sense because, of course, we all know that Discovery had site-to-site transporters from launch, and she could just have had the computer beam her there. So they went out of their way to include this technology on Discovery, even though it didn't exist in that time period when the ship was built. And now that they could make use of this technology in a story, they don't want to because of the character development opportunities. So they have to forget, conveniently, that they have that technology. It's terrible. Anyway, Raynor skillfully talks young Michael down after making a connection with Reese based on stuff Raynor learned about him in the previous episode, which was an excellent callback. And the plan works. Discovery comes out of the time loop with nothing changed in the past, having only missed 6 hours of linear time. Raynor and Michael then have a nice talk to sort of wrap up the conversation they were having before the time jump started. And they both come to see more of each other's point of view. And then there was a cool scene on the bridge where you can see that they're on the same page in front of the crew, and it was actually very cool. And that's where the episode ended. So I found that this episode had much less dumb than Discovery episodes usually have. Much less dumb. It felt more like a classic TNG episode where there's some anomaly happening, some phenomena happening, and the crew has to figure out how to stop it. Classic Trek scenario, and the machinations that they go through to get out of it were classic Trek, machinations. So I thought it was fine. Clearly, it's a filler episode because, it's a bottle episode where they never leave the ship, and they don't accomplish anything in service of the overall plot of the season, which of course didn't exist in classic Trek, but in this case it does, and so it's more obvious that it's filler to stretch out the overarching story by one more episode. But like I said, much less stupid in this episode, although there was still some stupid. The thing is that they kind of compensate for it, or in fact do compensate for it, with the continued character development of Commander Raynor, which I've been loving since the first episode of the season. The actor that plays the character is doing a great job, and the writing they've been doing for that character has been pretty great. I mean, there were some contrivances early on with the character so they could get him in the position they wanted him in, but now that he's there, I think they're doing a great job with the character. I thought that the moments he had with Michael, where she's someone that has grown over the years, were excellent, especially because it addressed in the first scene that they have together the whole business about how the crew of Discovery is over familiar with each other and over familiar with the captain. So they're self-aware, the producers and the writers, or at least the writers, about how that crew is too familiar with each other. And that isn't how a chain of command should work. And Raynor says it out loud. And I was like, yes, finally someone's talking about it. So I thought that was great. And at the same time, I thought it was great how in the end, Michael kind of goes, I pushed back against you when you said that at the beginning of our conversation, but I've thought about it, and you're right. Familiarity can be a problem, and it can be a detriment to mission cohesion because it flies in the face of crew discipline and the chain of command. And so, not everything about your style, which is much more rigid than mine, is wrong. So she came around to seeing things the way he sees them. And he says to her, you know, I was able to talk Reese down. Well, he doesn't say it so much, but he kind of acknowledges that being familiar with the crew and not keeping them entirely at arm's length was helpful because he was able to talk Reese down when it was important to be able to do that by talking to him about things he knew because he had listened at least a little bit when Reese was telling him something about himself that wasn't in his file when they had the meet and greets last episode, which he originally balked at having to do. But he did listen, which we saw at the end of that episode too, that he had listened. But this was a further demonstration of the fact that he took that stuff on board. And though he resists getting too familiar with the people under him, he took that on board and was able to use it in a crucial moment. And so he came to see Michael's point of view and to see that how Michael does things isn't entirely wrong either. And I thought that was great. That's classic Star Trek. That's exactly what they should be doing. That's exactly what they should have been doing these 5 seasons, but didn't. And I'm loving this character. And I just wish they'd done this years ago because it would have made the show so much better. It was just great having that B plot unfold over the course of this episode. And that's another thing. They didn't have 15 bajillion plots in this episode. You know, they could have jammed in something about their, Saru and his girlfriend, but they didn't. They could have jammed in something more about Adira and Gray, but they didn't. They stuck to the A plot and the B plot, which was itself not all that big. It was sort of like a mini plot. And the episode was much better. Even though it was rehash and even though it was filler, it was just a much better episode of television and a much better episode of Star Trek than what they usually do, which isn't saying a lot. But I didn't hate it. It didn't make me go, oh my God, this is so stupid, like the episodes usually do. I was a little annoyed at the concept of a time bug because that's stupid. But, it's a small thing because that just is the way they happened to put the ship in the dangerous situation it was in with the time jumping. They could have come up with anything to make it time jump. So it really doesn't matter that what they came up with is kind of dumb because it's just the book cover, as it were, of the scenario, which was that the ship was time jumping. So it really doesn't make a difference. It was just dumb. Anyway, it was like time crystals, dumb. But I can get past that because it wasn't the crux of the episode that there was this time bug. The crux of the episode was the ship was being forced to jump back through time and space. What exactly was doing it? It doesn't really matter. So it doesn't matter that it was dumb, that particular thing. But yeah, on balance, decent episode of Star Trek. Very good character stuff. And it had the callback to the situation when in the future at some point Discovery is going to be abandoned. So it had that callback. It was cool to see, the other callbacks to the crew in previous eras and all of that stuff. So I didn't dislike this episode nearly as much as I usually dislike Discovery. And that's the highest praise I can give it. On top of saying that the character stuff they did with Rayner and Michael even was very good. And so there you go. I'm going to get out of here for now. I'll be back to do a recap and review of next week's episode once it's released. Until I return, I wish you peace and long life.